The books you start seeing about the Nazi hunt throughout the United States, we picked up on those books and we started looking every single one of those books. Guess what?
They've been all sorts of rumors. Oh yeah, they killed Poles. No, they killed Jews. No, they killed the Russians. No, they killed this. Guys.
They're trying to devastate us altogether in terms of our power. Today I'm going to be dealing with a subject that's rather sensitive in the Ukrainian community. This is Simon Wiesenthal. Now this is between us. We're all Ukrainians.
Simon Wiesenthal, the legendary Nazi hunter.
We're going to go after Wiesenthal also. Quietly. Not as a Jew, but as a Soviet agent, which is what he was. This SOB, and I will say this on camera, this SOB fought against our partisans.
They end up creating a partisan army. And I know that they've been all sorts of rumors. Oh yeah, they killed Poles. No, they killed Jews. No, they killed the Russians. No, they killed this. Guys.
But someday, if we can find some info on him and his relationship to Charlie Allen, so we can get back to Charlie Allen.
A journalist in the 1960s by the name of Chuck Allen. He had written these exhaustive exposés on the existence of Nazis in the United States. He also held rallies to draw attention to the problem.
Charlie would be one hell of a guy to get rid of because he had a lot of friends. Allen has done us more damage than any single person. We even have his address and telephone number. What do you think we should... No, not on camera. Not on camera.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to what is certainly going to be an informative and educational discussion about the situation evolving in the Ukraine.
But in writing about Ukraine and West Porter's responses to what was going on there, we realized that while many readers follow the news, most of us don't know much about the country itself. Tonight's session in this amazing space is a way for us to learn more about the history, the geography, and the culture that has led Ukraine to where it is today. And Walter Zaretsky is the perfect person to help us understand that. He's executive director of the Center for U.S.-Ukrainian Relations. It provides opportunities for senior-level political, economic, security, diplomatic, cultural, and academic experts in the U.S. and Ukraine to exchange views on a wide range of subjects. Dr. Zaretsky earned graduate and undergraduate degrees from Columbia University, taught political science at NYU for nearly 3 decades, and in recent years he's done postdoctoral research on Eastern Europe. 2 questions.
Okay.
A couple of questions. It says, to what extent are charges of Ukrainian Nazism the result of what happened during World War II, when the Ukrainians treated the Germans as liberating them from Stalin's communism? That is, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
That, you know, it's funny because I've gone over that period of history, and that has to be, man, when I look at Stalin's 2-year collaboration with Hitler and the 7-day collaboration with that supposedly the Ukrainians did, where do the Ukes stand in all this? Those crazy Ukes ended up, and everybody wants to know why they're doing partisan resistance, they end up creating a partisan army. And I know that they've been all sorts of rumors. Oh yeah, they killed Poles. No, they killed Jews. No, they killed the Russians. No, they killed this. Guys, notice the Ukrainians are the only ones that did not have a puppet regime in World War II. So much for your Nazi collaboration. The Croatians might have ended up with those. The Norwegians ended up with those. Guess what? France. It's called Vichy France. Did you hear of a Ukrainian Vichy government? Now, in 1941, there was a moment in which, as Hitler is moving, the underground moved and wanted to declare a government. June 30th, literally, 1941. And there was a whole bunch of stuff that, yeah, those Ukrainians, man, were moving in. They were Nazis because they were moving in.
In July 1941, the Germans advanced into the Ukraine, where they were greeted as liberators.
Well, within 6 days, I know because one of those was my grandfather, they were put under house arrest. Half of them, 2 months later, ended up in Sachsenhausen, in Mattenhausen. My father-in-law went blind in Mattenhausen. And he was part of the underground. History has to separate itself because, yeah, there's stupidity. There has been stupidity. I said 17th century stupidity, ignorance serves thing. Bozos in Western Ukraine who might have done something stupid in the first 7 days, unprovoked by anybody man in the underground. That's another thing, and that's evil and it has to be condemned. But what can't be done is what they've done, which is that the movement itself was Nazi. Because that's where the falsification of history happens and why we're getting what we're getting.
This is the Azov Sea here and stuff. This is a bad version of Crimea. But he could do, here's Kiev.
Yeah.
This is one, so this is one of the things that the Americans learned. The Ukrainians are known for insurgencies for 100 years.
Right.
That's why the Russians don't particularly like them. They've called them all sorts of names in World War I, II, and Cold War. But the fact is, man, the Ukrainians are pretty good at this resistance stuff. Anyway, so the 150,000, not enough. So we don't think the first variant, the overall invasion, is an option. But he has 3 sub-variants. I'm trying to see, pull the Ukrainian armies here from Kiev and that are practicing now. And the thinking today is what he's done in the Duma, the Russian Duma, are regular troops in here saying that these have now united the same way as they did with Crimea.
Yeah.
If you have variant 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what's playing out right now, what we believe is the other options have gotten a little pale. So what he's looking to is this splendid little victory, as someone on ABC called it today. And the splendid little victory. Can you imagine 1 million Ukes men telling Putin this?
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that you're recording this.
Yes.
No, I hope you're not. I don't want that. And he may split the West because, and this is my last point, because I really do have to get going. He may want to split the intrusion and invasion. Most important thing is we don't want Washington to ever use that word again. Intrusion. If Russian.
I think will speak for itself. Today I'm going to be dealing with a subject that's rather sensitive in the Ukrainian community.
Ukrainian newsreel and documentary film studios. No statute of limitations. Here they are, the own criminals who were in hiding for a long time from the people's wrath and justice.
We probably ourselves did not half believe the charges we made 10 years ago when we first heard that there were countrymen of ours that were being accused of being Nazi collaborators, of being fascists from the World War II period.
Almost 40 years have gone by since that time when, as 20-year-olds, they committed their ghastly deeds, killed Ukrainians, Russians, Poles, and Jews. Blinded by nationalistic ideas and hatred for everything Soviet, they murdered innocent elderly men, women, and children.
At that time, we suspected somehow that there might be some interplay between that and some of the things that the Soviet Union was attempting to do in order to split us up as an immigrant community.
No, there can be no statute of limitations for crimes against humanity. In old Vyzhivka, in the Volyn region, the Soviet people have brought to trial Ukrainian bourgeois nationalism. Sergei Kovalchuk, who participated in the liquidation of 5,000 Jews in Lubomel, now lives in the United States of America. Alexei Lewandowski posed in front of his victims in the Ternopil and Precarpathian areas. He also lives in America. He and his like are now among those who loudly claim they belong to committees, leagues, and associations. They are united by one thing, their vicious hatred of the Soviet socialist system.
But I don't think that any of us were quite sure that we had any proof. We also weren't quite sure of the people that were being accused at that time. Some of these people were relatively unknown to us, certainly the case of Ivan Demjanjuk, who had been a very quiet auto worker in Cleveland, had really not participated much in the Ukrainian community in the first place, and so we weren't quite sure of who these people were.
Well, Ivan Demjanjuk, John Demjanjuk, was not an architect of the murder. He wasn't a desk murderer. He wasn't like Eichmann. He wasn't a commander of anything. He was a guard. And when we look at the Holocaust, one of the most important things to understand is how responsibility filters down through many levels of society. He represents an important aspect of the Holocaust, of the quote-unquote normal people who got involved in this, who became guards, but then lent a hand towards the murder of many, many thousands of people, in his case, and ultimately to 6 million Jews.
In the case of Bohdan Kuji, more was known about him, but again, we weren't quite sure one way or another. We didn't have eyewitnesses. The World War II situation was rather devastating. Many of the people that would have known who had done what had been killed. So to some extent, I think we were stunned at first. Most Americans started believing, well, okay, the Ukrainians, yeah, you're paranoid about the Soviet situation, but on the other hand, don't you think that there are a couple of Nazis amongst you? Wouldn't you admit that? I mean, let's be real. Everybody had a couple of Nazis. You should have answered them at that point and stuff like that. Maybe there are a couple of Nazis in your family. But we didn't, because to some extent we were stunned by the counteroffensive they did. And we didn't really have proof. And then suddenly, man, like a whirlwind, the Demjanjuk case comes up. And suddenly, like the whirlwind, the Kuji case comes up. And suddenly we find ourselves, Demjanjuk is already being transported to Israel before he had actual trial, before his trial made any sort of sense here in the United States. There were all sorts of weird setups, and Demjanjuk and Kuji essentially are railroaded in their cases. One ends up in Costa Rica before we have a chance to really create a serious defense, and one ends up in Israel under a death sentence, and what are we supposed to do with these people? And yet, in both cases, and I think that's how a group of us in New York, Ukrainians, got involved in this, and we came to the conclusions that we've now come and we're ready to give to the larger Ukrainian community.
Jewish Bolshevism, all right, was the underpinning of the Communist Party in Ukraine.
We started seeing problems within both the Demjanjuk case and the Kuji case. By the end, if you think that I'm absolutely nuts, we have people in Washington who now believe us and are ready to move on this. We actually end up proving that the case against us was a classic, not just Soviet, but a classic KGB psychological operation, an active measure of the highest caliber.
Yeah, I'm just going to finally say to everybody before everybody leaves, the fact is that we did spot someone who's very troubling. There are Russian trolls here working here in the United States. There's a character, an obnoxious character called Amos Robeson that continues to say that the entire community is involved in the continuation of a neo-Nazi plot
Hello, Dr. Lubomir Luchuk. Thank you so much for being here with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Today, I want to focus on one of the most controversial topics in history of Ukraine.
Ukrainians aren't Nazis, never were Nazis, and never will be Nazis. They fought against the Nazi Third Reich. They fought, however, as patriots. So when you hear the words Ukrainian nationalism, some people get very upset and they think that there's something wrong here. These are Nazi collaborators. No, they're not. We now know, based on KGB documents that we have found, that the Soviet Union deliberately provoked tension between Ukrainians and Jews, for example, in the diaspora, claiming that Ukrainians had collaborated in the Holocaust, when in fact the evidence for that is very, very minor. It's just simply not there.
The first clue, and I literally mean the first clue Marilyn Goldstein provided us with, is she says that the detective that was working on the case in the 70s, for Demjanjuk in the late 70s, early 80s, suggested that there was a list that was put out that was first given to the Justice Department and then to the OSI, and this list contained 73 Ukrainians, and that this list was the list that contained Demjanjuk's name. Okay? And someone from a left-wing Ukrainian-American newspaper, left-wing, pro-Soviet American, Ukrainian-American newspaper, had handed in this list, and Demjanjuk's name was on it. That was the first clue. The second clue was that Alan Ryan, in an interview with her, claimed that there was some great Ukrainian patriot who had, in fact, done an entire write-up on Demjanjuk and sent it to OSI in 80-81. We didn't know who this was. We said pro-Soviet. It actually didn't even use the word pro-Soviet. It used left-wing Ukrainian-American newspaper. Well, I, as a Banderite, might have thought that Swoboda was a little left-wing, you know, Melnikites, Vikarites, and so on and so forth. But I said, no, but that's not left-wing. And they wouldn't betray a Ukrainian.
Thousands of far-right Ukrainians have marked the 106th anniversary of the birth of controversial nationalist Stepan Bandera. He fought Russian and Polish occupation in Ukraine in the first part of the 20th century. They chant glory to Stepan Bandera. Glory, 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 they chant. Bandera is considered a hero by some, but denounced as a World War II Nazi collaborator by others.
East German communist woman won his heart over. So she writes this book in tribute to him, I guess. Now this book, written for the left-wing circuit, not thinking, man, that the right wing or the center wing or even good left-wingers like me who've turned right because of reading this stuff might read this, she reveals a great deal about Charlie Allen. Who is Charlie Allen and what kind of damage did he do to us? First, Charlie Allen started his crusade against the Nazis in the United States as early as the 1950s. He got his first list from two characters called Morris Shapps and Chaim Schuler, both of whom worked for Jewish communist newspapers, it says so. And Allen had been writing for The Nation at that time, a left-wing journal, but nothing that we could prove had commie connections and so on. But he got involved with Chaim Schuller and Shaps, and he took the list from them. But when he took the list from them, must have been something wrong, because he must have taken something more from them, because the FBI in 1957 and 1958 have got a file on him. In 1957 and 58 already, it seems as though, man, he had made a connection with the communists. And the FBI had a file on him. And guess why in 1962 we did not have the Nazi hunt? Because in 1962, when Charlie Allen first submitted his list of 16, on which you find Carlos Linus, in that first list already, 30 years ago, Charlie Allen was turned down by Bobby Kennedy because Bobby Kennedy thought he was probably a communist. Can you imagine a liberal Democrat like Bobby Kennedy calling someone a communist? He must have been a goddamn communist. Ms. Holtzman calls together a subcommittee on immigration and naturalization, and from that subcommittee, she wants more testimony to prove that we need a Nazi hunting unit with teeth, more money, $2.5 million more dollars, and with 18 lawyers and 36 researchers. How's a Diminuka or Kuji going to stand up against that? Something called the Office of Special Investigation. Never passed legislatively, created administratively. How? Because she creates this subcommittee in 1977, and guess who the expert witness on her board is? None other than Charles R. Allen, Jr. Read the book and weep. We said to ourselves, Jesus Christ, Charles Allen, a known agent. The FBI was after him in the 50s. The CIA for 10 years. Romerstein admitted...
My friend Herb Romerstein wrote about it.
Romerstein admitted to us, man, in Washington this last week that they've known Charlie Allen was bad news from 1951.
And he also then qualified it and backed us in the 80s and said, guys, 7 days might have been some, they walked in.
By the end, if you think that I'm absolutely nuts, we have people in Washington who now believe us and are ready to move on this.
Now, I don't want you to come away from this with the idea that this book is all villains. There are a few heroes, and one of them is the man you see here on the left, a journalist in the 1960s by the name of Chuck Allen. I had never heard of Allen when I began my research, but he soon became a hero of mine because I learned that he had written these exhaustive exposés for obscure publications that no one had ever heard of, often communist-leaning publications, some small Jewish publications, on the existence of Nazis in the United States. He also held rallies to draw attention to the problem. You see a poster for one on the right in 1963 in Brooklyn. He held others here in Los Angeles, others in Chicago. And he would try and reveal the fact to the public that you had people who had been identified as war criminals at Nuremberg now living in the United States freely with little investigation or scrutiny. Now, not only did most of the country ignore Chuck Allen, but the FBI not only went so far as to put a trail on him for years. J. Edgar Hoover, the famous director of the FBI, signed a warrant, a secret warrant, declaring him a communist subversive and a national security threat in the 1960s, and he was wiretapped for years. And FBI agents would trail him around New York and Washington and open his mail coming from Eastern Europe as he was trying to do his reporting to gather evidence on various Nazi figures like Dr. Hubertus Strughold. And it would be another 20 years before the country as a whole would begin to recognize what Chuck Allen had been saying since the early 1960s, that in fact there were many, many Nazis, dozens, hundreds, perhaps thousands, living openly in the United States, and no one was doing anything about it. In 1980, under pressure from Congress, primarily Brooklyn Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman, the Justice Department did finally, belatedly, open a whole new team of investigators, historians, and lawyers to go after and try and deport dozens and dozens of Nazis. Unfortunately, by that point, they were middle-aged or elderly. The evidence was stale. Legal problems were enormous, and many of them would live out their lives in the United States. It was a tragic case, in my view, of too little and too late. And with that, I think we will open it up to questions.
The books you start seeing about the Nazi hunt throughout the United States, we picked up on those books and we started looking every single one of those books. Guess what? They're quoting Charlie R. Allen Jr. The Anderson brothers, Inside the League, the thing that hits O Unupa ABN, that quotes Charlie Allen. Charles Hyam, or they said, I always called it Higham. They tell me it's Charles Hyam. Well, what do I know? He writes a book called American Swastika. But when you read American Swastika, they're not just interested in anybody. In American Swastika, they go back to the 20s and 30s and call Svoboda in 1940, and Ivan Buchko, who later becomes Archbishop, while he's still hanging around in St. George, serving as a priest in late 30s, they called them Nazi collaborators. They claim that the Ukrainians were Nazi collaborators in the 30s. They call Svoboda, if some of you have seen that little article, they call Svoboda an official fascist newspaper for OUN. Well, I, as a Banderite, might have thought that Svoboda was a little left-wing, you know. Now, this is the kind of stuff that was coming out, but every time we looked, we found Charlie Allen's name appended to it. So we said to ourselves, who is this Charlie Allen? I mean, what is this Charlie Allen circle of friends? Where does it end? Maybe this line can lead us to the KGB operative that's behind all of this. Maybe we can finally prove that this is an actual KGB psychological operation. Because Charlie Allen is an agent of influence. The best you can do is say he might have worked for the Soviets, but you can't prove that he's KGB. So you got to find the KGBist. So we looked at Charlie Allen and his friends to see if we can't, at the end of the line, find a couple of KGB agents. At the same time, we started noticing something. As we were reading all this crap, as we were reading this, what we discovered is what were the people that were writing this stuff actually aiming at. And you want to know something? They weren't aiming at the general community. They weren't, and this is the sad part because he may hang and he's not really the point man in all of this. Demjanjuk wasn't the issue, folks. The real issue, for you read the Anderson brothers and you read Charles Hyam's book, read Howard Bloom's book, is this. And we were shocked by it. The real area where they're aiming are at the nationalists. OUN UPA. They kept pointing at OUN UPA UHVR ABN and the people that had been involved in the nationalist movement. And we kept reading this stuff and saying, how come Demjanjuk and Kuji men aren't mentioned? How come the camp guards? How come that stuff is not the stuff that they're really attacking if they're looking for Nazis?
What can't be done is what they've done, which is that the movement itself was Nazi.
And the more we read it, we began to realize they weren't just attacking OUN UPA. The commies in 83 and 84 thought we were still ignorant. They didn't know that they had young, talented Ukrainians running around. And so they thought we'd never figure this out. But in fact, what it was is they were aiming to discredit OUN and UPA for a reason. The Ukrainian nationalists for a reason. I wish it were just only us, that we were so grand that they had to discredit OUN UPA. To some extent, that is true.
Because I think that our congressmen, both Democrat and Republican, I can say this because I'm working with the community all the time, and now on the national level, I can say that our congressmen and senators are saints, Republican and Democrat. I think that 80% on either side and stuff like that would back anything we say.
But there's another thing that is involved in a classic Cold War psyop. It's not just a psyop, it's a Cold War psyop. What they attempted to do is this. They attempted to say Ukrainians generally were Nazis, but there were special Nazis. They were the real fascist killers. They were the OUN UPA. This OUN UPA fascist collaborators that they were protected by the CIA in the 40s and 50s, and this is where we began to see the theme they're developing. So the argument was that UPA came here flushed with Hitler's Ostpolitik, that is, Hitler's fascist attitudes towards the Eastern Europe and Russia against the Soviet Union, came here, convinced the CIA, convinced the American government, convinced the American army and so on and so forth that the Soviets were the bad news, and guess what? From that point on, the American government started moving along fascist lines. We must be enormously powerful to be able to do that, but this is what they were claiming, that the Eastern European fascists had convinced the CIA to start the Cold War, and so therefore the Cold War was concocted by these fascists who had fought as collaborators with the Nazis in World War II. Complicated? Not very. Because what they were trying to do, if you notice, is trying to say that the Cold War was nothing but a neo-Nazi concocted plot. That fighting against the communists was only done by people who had fascist tendencies. Not only in those days, but in our days. But we said, well, maybe this is bizarre. Maybe this isn't true. Well, guess what? We started looking further. And we found not only that it is true, that that was the theme, but we found the people that led us to the KGB agents. It turns out that when we started following the Magic Circle further, Charlie Allen further, his friends further, we ran into Joe Conason. And Joe Conason, remember the thesis? To catch a Nazi? Levy, subject D, and he's holding it up like this, and they got a good photograph of him doing a salute. If you've ever seen that in the United States, from the United States, in the Village Voice, maybe I can show you a picture of it. It's such a lovely picture and stuff like that that I ought to show it to you folks. Here we have it. You've seen this. Yes? Has anybody ever seen this? And here it is. Imprisoned in 1934 for attempting to assassinate Interior Minister of Poland, Mykola Lebied ran the security force of the Ukrainian fascist organization, attending Gestapo training school where Jews were killed for practice, and had accused the murder of many of his own countrymen. At the end, what does it say? Why has he been saved? At the end, in the little bracket here, it says, the CIA brought Mykola Lebied to the United States under an assumed name and concealed his past from the INS. Why? Because Mykola Lebied was working for the CIA. We looked from Conason to Loftus, the guy who wrote the Belarus file, and we started checking out if this was true about the other Eastern European groups, like the Belarusians. Lo and behold, Loftus, who wrote it about the Belarusians but had to mention us for 4 pages, and especially about UNBA, and especially how the CIA helped them get into the United States, Loftus was involved in this circle too. When we started looking for all these names, we suddenly discovered that all of them write for an outfit, one outfit. And that outfit happens to be, we didn't know who ran that outfit, but that outfit happens to specialize in this crap. It's, and you can see, special, the Nazis, the Vatican, and the CIA. In effect, this outfit, it's called Covert Action Information Bulletin, specializes in saying that anyone who is an anti-communist is a fascist. And that's why you needed those Eastern Europeans, because the connection, you needed the soulful connection. These Eastern European collaborators had now spread the Fourth International Reich and so on and so forth, the Fourth Reich, the Nazi International. This is the kind of stuff that was going on. But who ran this stuff? Did you ever ask yourself who ran this stuff? The guy who runs the Covert Action Information Bulletin is none other than a character called Philip Agee. Who is Philip Agee? He's the one that's turned in over 200 CIA operatives around the world. Well, he's now decided to get into the business of denouncing us. You should see some of the wonderful articles he's written in here. But what we found is that journal, every single one of the people that we found writing the stuff about us was in his journal. Now, what we had to do is come up with a theme that would make sense. We had the network, but we didn't quite have the theme straightened, why they would pick on us and the CIA and the Cold War and whatever you want. The clue set off a series of fireworks for us, because thoughts first flashed back to Anderson, and in Anderson, Charlie Allen had been pushing that line. We had not first noticed that Charlie Allen had been pushing that all the counterinsurgency training in the 50s was done by killers, mechanics, Ukrainians mostly, for the CIA. It's wonderful when you read this stuff. You can't believe that UNUPA trained the entire Cold War apparatus. You know? We thought that they were just simple, humble folk men that fought in the Carpathian Mountains. They suddenly had invented the Cold War. We traveled around the world. Only theoretically, that is. And what we started finding is there are more books that are coming out. Blowback by Christopher Simpson. And the title is America's Recruitment of the Nazis and Its Effect on the Cold War. So we found it in Canada, we found it in the United States. We found, if you read this Strati Informator, we found it in Australia. Mark Ahrens, son of Laurie Ahrens, head of the Communist Party. Well, nobody knew that at the time until people started scratching and so on and so forth. Mark Ahrens was spreading the same thing about UNUPA, the CIA, and the Cold War, an extension of Hitler's Ostpolitik. We looked to England, the same thing. Ed Harriman in the New Statesman, cupboard full of Nazis, the same thesis. We looked to Sweden. There we fought them back. We fought them to a standstill. They had to take they literally had to take a clearing statement because we proved, in fact, that their information, they were using Coniston, they were using Allen, so on and so forth, was coming out of sources that were rather dubious. In effect, what we found is that there's a network of people, that is doing this, and there's a reason for it. The reason is, and we very concretely know it because in America we suffered from it, the reason is they're trying to devastate us altogether in terms of our power. You know that 2 Ukrainians got fired from the Bush campaign. Both of them had nothing to do with the Nazis. Belinsky was someone who was born and raised in the United States, even though he's a super Uk and stuff. Fedorak was 7 years old during World War II, couldn't have possibly been a Nazi, but both got fired as Nazis. Well, guess what? Chris Simpson, Aaron, all these guys belong to the Magic Circle. They're all mentioned in this particular work by Russ Billant, Old Nazis, the New Right, and the Reagan administration. The role of the domestic fascist networks in the Republican Party and their effect on U.S. Cold War politics. It is this work that was published by the National Jewish Weekly that started the trouble for Fedorak and Belinsky and got them fired from the Bush campaign, and we now have no political impact in Washington. Not having political impact in Washington at this point is death for us here. In Amerikańskiej Imigracji, for Canadians, you've won in the shame, God love you. But for us in the United States, we no longer have any political pull or any political power because our people, have been nailed as fascists, and think of why that would be important for the Soviets. Obviously, if things get hot in Ukraine, we don't have people who can represent us in Washington. Why? Because they've been besmirched as Nazis.
Yeah, I'm just going to finally say to everybody before everybody leaves, the fact is that we did spot someone who's very troubling. There are Russian trolls here working here in the United States.
Yeah, things will contribute to the new Yuki cuisine on the first floor. Treatment, they poured water into this and this is no longer Sprite.
Oh, I will bring you a new one. Oh, you wanted Sprite?
Yeah, that was Sprite.
Okay, sorry. How are you doing?
All right, good. Somebody knows where you know around here.
Oh, you a team leader.
Oh, is that what it is? Oh, you're more trouble.
I thought you were ignoring me the other day. I was saying,
oh, shit, this is Mark Robin, the guy who's been writing all these trouble things. Oh, no. These are really, but Mark, you really work here. I need to do, but they won't believe it.
we actually end up proving that the case against us was a classic, not just Soviet, but a classic KGB psychological operation, an active measure of the highest caliber. And should I be talking about it openly? Are there people that are going, oh my God, maybe I shouldn't be talking about this openly? Well, I want to be talking about it openly, because the one thing that that's going to lose the entire community is if nobody talks about it. And it's happening. And we ought to do something about it. Now, what we had to do is come up with a theme that would make sense. We had the network, but we didn't quite have the theme straightened. An overarching question arose. Someday, if we can find some info on him and his relationship to Charlie Allen, so we can get back to Charlie Allen. Now, this is the kind of stuff that was coming out, but every time we looked, we found Charlie Allen's name appended to it. So we said to ourselves, who is this Charlie Allen? I mean, what is this Charlie Allen circle of friends? Where does it end? Maybe this line can lead us to the KGB operative that's behind all of this. Maybe we can finally prove that this is an actual KGB psychological operation. You folks are the target. They want to control your horizontal, they want to control your vertical, they want to be your outer limits. You can't allow for that. So, where do I end? I end right here. This is it. This is the story. It's a nasty story. The commies are out to get you. The KGB is out to get you, and you better wake up. It's not just my paranoia. I've done 6 years of psychoanalysis because of this. All right?
June 30th, literally, 1941, as Hitler is moving, the underground moved and wanted to declare a government.
You know, the 2 Ukrainians got fired from the Bush campaign. Both of them had nothing to do with the Nazis. Belinsky was someone who was born and raised in the United States, even though he's a super uke and stuff. Fedorak was 7 years old during World War II, couldn't have possibly been a Nazi, but both got fired as Nazis. Well, guess what? Anyway, yes, that's...
Follow-up question. Wasn't Allen also, for a time, briefly employed by the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith?
Yes, he was.
And wasn't he also employed in some capacity with the New York Electrical Workers Union, a communist front?
In 1959, yes, he was.
Communist-dominated organization?
Not only that, but I've got news for you. This is Simon Wiesenthal. Now, this is between us. We're all Ukrainians. And I'm not going to pick on Simon Wiesenthal, because there are a lot of Judea men that have actually started trying to help us because they realize that the Zionists are being hit. Wiesenthal suggested that I call him. Wiesenthal suggested that Herb Jaffe call Charles Allen. We're beginning that investigation, and folks, what we found about Wiesenthal is not pretty.
Simon Wiesenthal, the legendary Nazi hunter.
Aha. Wollen Sie ihm sagen, er möge Wiesenthal an?
Loved by his supporters, detested and feared by his enemies. He met Kaplan in Washington this spring to urge him to act against war criminals here before it was too late. Wiesenthal had 35 years of research to work from.
This declassified interrogation of Wiesenthal suggests that he wasn't in the concentration camp all the time. Wiesenthal was not in concentration camps throughout the whole war. He escaped, supposedly, we have a whole stack of things, in 1943, ran away to the partisans, and then was recaptured in 1944 and did a tour of German concentration camps. Can you imagine an escaped Jewish laborer from a concentration camp, and then a Soviet partisan, and the Germans don't shoot him on the spot? They give him a tour of 7 different concentration camps? A little strange for me, wouldn't you say? But what I find more strange is when he testifies about where he fought with the partisans, and that they were in fact Soviet partisans. He says, where was that? Between Lemberg and Ternopil. We always knew what the Germans had, when the Germans had signaled. Very often it was so that a group of policemen, auxiliary police, were at the edge of the woods. 50 men would take a walk some 100 meters deep into the woods, fired a few rounds, and then it was reported to us some 100 partisans shot dead and 10 partisan shelters uncovered. There were also partisan groups who were friendly to the Germans. They were the so-called UPA group. This group was supported by the German army to fight other partisans. Their attitudes were anti-Soviet, and they received their equipment from the Germans. But the next line is the crucial line. We did most of our fighting against this group. Wiesenthal was not only in the Soviet partisans. Thanks. I have 15 minutes to explain this. I don't want 15 minutes to explain this. I need 1 minute to explain this. He was in the Soviet partisans. He achieved the rank of officer in the Soviet partisans, which usually means, man, that he had to be somehow connected with the party, perhaps even in intelligence and KBD capacity and so on. This SOB, and I will say this on camera, this SOB fought against our partisans.
For the last time, what do you know about the Odessa?
Only just what Simon Wiesenthal told me.
ODESSA, the organization of former members of the SS. It was formed at the end of the war to help SS men to disappear, to get them out of Germany, set them up with new identities. Thousands were given forged documents.
The war has been over for 20 years.
But the Odessas grown like a spider's web.
We've got real problems here, folks, because we're not going to hit on Jewish groups. But we certainly, because the Jewish groups, man, you know, they have their own problems. Now the Zionists are being accused of being, fascist too. But guys like Wiesenthal and guys like Reuben Eisenstein, who wrote their Soviet partisan memoirs and call it Jewish resistance in Eastern Europe, you wouldn't believe the kind of hideous, racist stuff they've written in their book. The innate love of looting by the Ukrainian savage peasantry. Innate love? What was it? We genetically have a love of looting? What are you guys, sick? That's racist. That's chauvinist. And we ought to explain it to them. We don't want to deal with your racism and chauvinism.
When they asked me once, man, about at a Holodomor, one of those genocide get-togethers, why is the Ukrainian thing unique? I said, well, in the others, the Holocaust is the most devastating because it's the most systemic. But the one that the Ukrainians is most troubling because, and it's unique in its own way, because its last chapter has not yet been written.
The Jews, they didn't give the directives to conduct the famine, but they implemented it.
We're going to go after Wiesenthal also. Quietly. Not as a Jew, but as a Soviet agent, which is what he was. I memorized the book, so here it goes. And there's Rabbi Yumpel and stuff like that, with who's the founder of the National Committee against, we're on camera. National Committee Against Nazism on the trip to Eastern Europe. This character here was a devastating character. Yumpel's record, I mean, he did an enormous amount of damage for us in the 60s and 70s because he had very high-level friends in some of the major Jewish organizations. Enemy number one for us is the Muscovites, man, sitting in the Kremlin. Those Bolsheviks have done this psyop. Everyone else, the Jewish groups, the Ukrainian commie groups, the East Germans, whatever you find, they're all pawns in the game run by the 2nd and 5th Directorate of the KGB. Your enemy is not the other groups, your enemy is the KGB. And remember, Fourth International Reich and so on and so forth, the Fourth Reich, if you read it in the Inside the League, Anderson, Stichko in running the ABN was running the Fourth Reich, the Nazi International. This is the kind of stuff that was going on. But who ran this stuff? Did you ever ask yourself who ran this stuff?
The building is home for Ukrainian American families and a place where a number of Ukrainian NGOs are located.
A group of us in New York, Ukrainians, got involved in this, and we came to the conclusions that we've now come and we're ready to give to the larger Ukrainian community. We started seeing problems.
Thank you, Walter. Welcome, Senator. It's so good to see you again. Walter, thanks to you and your team for organizing this terrific conference.
And Walter, thank you for the privilege to be a part of this. I love your events. I always feel like it's right on the edge of just coming apart. I mean, it keeps me on the edge of my seat.
Thank you, Walter, for the invitation to be here among so many friends. And I definitely agree with Ben that your seminars are like graduate school. You never know what's going to happen, and they're always very exciting. So thank you.
And let me just say, by way of, Walter, you went through some interesting history just before we began here.